attributes do you think of in terms of what attributes does God have that are more feminine?
God is Trinity for me. Holy Spirit has always been the feminine power, but not a soft feminine power.
No, that's why I started to go, well, actually no, because it's edgy and it's transforming and it's empowering and I use the, but not necessarily soft, and it can be painful and tearing in the way it is transforming.
Yeah, like I almost, you know that feeling just before a thunderstorm, where you just want to run, you just want to do something crazy and wild because something is tearing you up intuitively and making you move and be something beyond yourself. That to me is a real Holy Spirit energy, that wild creativity. It's wildfire and it's breath and it's life and it's rendering and transformative and it's rocking and it's tears. The whole kind of spectrum of creativity. I mean, Jesus I just take implied as male, and I have no need to say Jesus is woman. God I find more difficult because there's a part of me that knows God as father and mother. But within the church, our languaging has been so God the Father, Lord, Abba, that you have to fight to reclaim those words, those images. And it's like a default. And you find yourself tripping up and going, oh, okay. And people react really strongly when you use God the Mother. And even though it is deeply biblical and it is deeply a part of our, rooted in our tradition, you know, you use it once and suddenly people are going, goodness me, you called God the Mother, that's very feminist. Well, yes. And
historical.
Yeah, and how odd that you don't.
Exactly.
God's more tricky for me in that. Yeah.
There was a time when I was a teenager and going through, because women at that point were just beginning to be ordained, and the whole patriarchal language was abusive to women because they were excluding us in so many places and telling us we were not worthy in so many ways, that I stopped calling God God for a long time, because even the name God implied total patriarchy. Well, this is way back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And just called God love, which was neither male or female for me.
And it's interesting, I always remember in training someone saying about remembering what language you use, because you will look out and you'll see someone impacted by your language. And looking out there and hearing a fellow priest say, using, you know, God the Father is, you know, life-giving and loves and cares, and you're looking through the congregation and you see the men and women who've been abused by the Father, and they've not been able to reclaim that language, and so how painful that can be for them, and not having a mother that is strong and powerful, God, that can go, you're welcome here, you're loved here, and I'm not going to hurt you.
I think the church could improve on now with the inclusive language.
It is always improving. I mean, we still have, hymns were a huge thing when I started at St. Margaret's 20 years ago, and I was so pleased that Jill Kerr was on my side with that. And when I wanted to change the language, she would then change the language with something that scanned well. It had to scan well, which was really lovely, but was inclusive. And the prayer book went a long way. So it's nearly 30 years we've had the prayer book with much more inclusive language. But it is in the psyche of our church, both clergy and lay, that still goes back to those old images of, and those old precepts, paradigms of God as male, authoritative, even punitive.
So how can we start bringing more of the feminine into the church?
One of the difficulties, I think, is that whole element of we have a liturgical commission, and we haven't. They think they've done the work. Everyone thinks they did the work because we went through the 60s and 70s with feminism, and then feminism became a dirty word, and then inclusivity widened to do the really critical and ongoing work with Māori, which isn't complete by any means, but it meant that it was almost like people thought the work had been done and the fashion wasn't there.
That's right.
And so when we're doing Eucharist, all the languaging that we are to use is around Father. And we sometimes say silly things like, just translate it in your mind.
Yeah.
You know, and...
Which isn't authentic.
No, that's not authentic at all, and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I think that women, in educating young women like you do, and seeing a wider picture of what is God, what are the names of God, how is God working, both biblically, but more importantly in the world today, because I think there's been this disconnect that God is actually present in everything.
Yes.
You know, like one of the things that I'm constantly talking to people about is finding the gods in the footnotes of your life. You know, like scuffing up.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, that's patented. No, but actually God is in everything. And so, what does she look like when we search for God?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What do you think she looks like? Do you think she looks like Megan?
I think she looks like you. I think she looks like you.
The holy Peg and Meg.
No, not terribly holy.
No.
The unholy Peg.
You know, I think holiness has been something too that's held down the feminine God.
Yes.
That, you know, when the church got in the bedroom, when the church decided on what was right behaviour.
Yes. When the church changed, the old concept of menstruation was that women were put apart and men saw it as unclean, whereas in actual fact it was so sacred because at that time they were bleeding and blood was life-giving, and so they needed to be apart because they were totally sacred in that moment, not because they were totally unclean. And that's been twisted and taken away from us, and all those kinds of imagery where we've been oppressed again and again and again.
And it becomes very subtle, and it becomes so invasive that it's not until you say something like God the Mother, and that should actually be quite a normal term, and suddenly people go, oh, crikey, you know, phew, that's a bit, phew. And suddenly
well, the difference is that that's what they say in the parish, but in the school they're saying, but we don't hear that anywhere else. That's what I find is so different. We can do the education, but in society, it isn't like that, especially in the church in the world. It's not like that.
So how do you bring it more into to the young girls to kind of instill it so it doesn't get
The girls
rocked?
actually get it.
They get it. How are you doing that?
I think because I'm a woman in a girls' school, and I think because that is the language I use all the time. Mother, Father, God, Mother God, creative spirit, nurturing, compassionate God. They hear the adjectives over and over that are inclusive and encompassing, not purely feminine or masculine. And storytelling.
It becomes normative.
It is normative here.
Yeah.
And the kids from the Catholic schools still find that difficult. That they're, because they are more of an established church culture, they then are, their perception is of a more masculine God.
Because they did a really, I mean, and I might be totally wrong here, so stop me and wipe it if I'm wrong. But if you look at Catholicism,
Mm.
that holds, especially within things like the women religious movements, hold such deep truths about the feminine connection with God,
Mm.
and God the feminine. Yet, in Mary, which has often been used as we honour women because of Mary,
Mm.
what we've actually done is put her a step away from God.
Mm.
So you don't have to look at God the feminine.
That's right.
Because there's Mary. But also, you've got this kind of theology around the women and biblical women. You know, Mary is this meek, mild, not as the stroppy woman who raged at the crucifixion of her son.
Exactly.
You know, so it drips down through.
Or
into
who
all
was
of
so
them.
incredibly brave because she actually faced death. Being an unmarried,
Yeah.
pregnant woman
Yep.
was a death sentence, and she faced that.
Mhm.
And the gentleness and the support of Joseph is so undermined.
Oh,
You know,
he
that
saved her life.
he saved her life.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
this family was a family of love. No wonder Jesus was a loving man.
Yeah.
I love this stuff.
Yeah.
Gets me so.
And it's really interesting because at Christmas people love that story.
Yeah.
But if you then put up a shot of a teenage pregnant girl today,
Being stoned.
people go, well, that's terrible. But what's she doing being a teenager
Yeah.
pregnant? You know, like it's like we've sanitized the story or cut our story off from ourselves. So we've cut off this rich tradition of women and as a reflection of the feminine God.
Mhm. And I think it's also because we are afraid of life and death. That it's not just masculine and feminine, this is life, this is death, this is life again. You know, it's that whole cycling, and we just want to look at the life. You know, we just want to look at how we are ordinary every day, and we don't want to look at what brings us into the world, what takes us on into God's world, what takes us then back to be with God.
So in the day-to-day, in people's kind of day-to-day faith and spirituality, what are some things they could be doing to connect more with the feminine?
Private.
You know, I think Judaism has a beautiful tradition of raging with God,
Yes.
of taking whatever it is you're there, because, you know, God knows the heart of us, and being able to rage it out, to cry it out, to weep it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we corporatize worship and we make it very rigid, we don't allow always those spaces for tears, for the natural response.
Or for laughter.
Yeah,
Laughter.
God's got a great sense of humour.
Jesus had an amazing sense of humour.
Absolutely. Yeah. So humanising and giving the space to rage or to do whatever, laugh, whatever, I think frees us up to get to know God better, and then to go, what is this God we're getting? This is a safer God than I thought.
Yeah.
It's not judge, you know. That's not to say we're not called to account.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much more. God is so much more than we can understand.
So things to do is just to be real, and the corporatizing of the worship has confined us. And so to say, what do we need to do, is a bit like asking, you know, if I do this, am I bringing in the feminine more? No, it's about being real. It's about as we mentor young women to explore what it means for them to be women, we also explore what it means for them to be divine. What it explores what it means for them to be creators, not whether they have children or not, but what, you know, creators in the world of laughter and of connections and of joy and of pain bearers, sorrow comforters, and all those things that females do very well.
And, you know, there's a real job here for men to look at
We
God.
have to do it in partnership. Yes.
Absolutely. Because there is a real gift in God and the feminine divine for men. But that's the real challenge, because then you come up against the whole kind of masculinity, power and control, patriarchal stuff. What would it mean to bow down to a feminine God? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because to fall on your knees when you need to God is an incredibly humbling experience. Often takes a huge grief or a huge trauma to bring you to your knees, you know.
To cry into the bosom of God.
Absolutely. And when you use that terminology, I think they get it.
Yeah. They can identify.
They can identify. And when you use things like, you know, Julian of Norwich's stuff.
How long ago was that?
Yeah. Hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember having a vision many years ago, and I was breastfeeding Christ, and then Christ was breastfeeding me. And I took it to spiritual direction thinking I'm really sick. There's something really wrong with me. And people seeing this might think that too. And my spiritual director said, "Oh, so you've been reading Julian of Norwich?" And I said, "I've never heard of him." You know? good, yeah. So it's a boy's name, you know. And he said, no, it's this woman, and she talks about the breastfeeding Christ. And God and Trinity is this nurturing, life-giving, creative force. Yeah.
So you're not crazy?
No.
That's good.
But I did subjugate it for a while,
I
you
can
know,
believe
when I, because I've done the whole kind of goddess stuff in a non-Christian world, and it was interesting, but it wasn't deeply authentic, and God was calling me back, in really for the first conscious time. And going in, I thought you had to follow Christian rules, you know, you don't read these books, you don't mention these words, you don't listen to this music, you know, all that stuff. And then as the feminine God goes, come on, you know, you're being woken up again to this huge, vibrant, creative force. You can see why people leave the church when they can't find it.
So I think a new anthem that the church should take on is "This Is Me" from The Greatest Showman.
Yeah.
When you cut me down, you know, I am brave, I am bruised, this is who I'm meant to be, this is me. It's just brilliant.
You know, that, and these anthems that are coming out, you know, like the song Brave, you know, about shouting out and proclaiming, there are these sort of modern day prophets that are eking into the psyche of our young ones, and we need to have the courage to make sure that we don't smash that down.
Absolutely,
you know?
Absolutely. Because the prophets need support too.
Yeah, and I do believe we have this new era of prophets that are speaking through women, and they're speaking through all ages. You know, there was a little boy the other day, and he was talking with a group of new missionaries, so that lots of zeal, right? Lots of zeal, and this mission was saying, I know Jesus. And this little boy's like 11, says, no, you don't. He says, what do you mean, I know Jesus? And he said, were you there? You never met him. And this missionary turned around and said, don't you believe? And he went, I believe, but I don't know him because I wasn't there, but I believe, and I think that's what it's called faith. And the guy had no comeback, you know, because this child was taken literally about knowing. But I thought, how wonderful. No, that's belief. So that's faith. Yeah.
So is that something that you...
So, we only have a short time, but adoptionism, like God as parent, with an awareness that God takes on many forms in all our different life stages. What does it mean for those who have not had a mother who loved them the way they needed to find a healing presence in God that is feminine? I think that's remarkably powerful. What does it mean to find a God that won't strike you, or won't fail to feed you, that will nurture you,
that will affirm you, that will encourage you, that will say you are glorious.
You're
Is
my
what-
beloved and
my
who I'm
beloved,
pleased. Yeah, and look at you and love you truly, madly, deeply.
Yep.
You know, in ways that you can't feel about yourself.
Mm.
Because I know when I came back to God, well, actually came to God for the first time because I was baptised a baby. I came in a need of forgiveness
Mhm.
on the very edge. I didn't think I was going to make it. But I thought, well, I'll go to the church because God forgives people and God has to love me.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think I was even worthy enough for God's natural love. It was because God had
That's
to.
true. Yeah.
But that was the of, well, God will love this person.
Mhm.
So what does it mean for abandoned emotionally or whatever, physically or whatever, damaged people to know they could meet a mother or a father for the first time that loved them and was gentle, you know. That's the transformative power of God, isn't it? And allowing our young ones to be raised up to have
Mhm.
authority and guidance and
Credibility.
mentoring. Yeah.
Do you see the church creating barriers for that at the moment?
They're scared of what they don't know. They're scared of not the a recurring frame in the current debates among the churches. I'm actually afraid of not being listened to, whichever perspective we come from or whichever side we're on. And so it's the distrust and the disconnection we have with each other. And I think that's largely because we're afraid to be genuine with each other. So therefore we're afraid to be both masculine and feminine in our interactions. And so
And it's safer then to default into an intellectual argument or a position.
Mhm.
Because you could say to people who think differently on the other side, like, you know, traditionally God in the feminine, I mean, it's mentioned throughout
Yes.
the Bible, and they'd go, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So when's the last time you preached on it? Oh, goodness me, look at the time.
Yeah.
You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Because as we're finding it difficult here to, well, actually, we're not finding it that difficult, but I think the church finds it difficult to identify what is the feminine, where do we see the feminine, how do we encourage the feminine. I think that the next partnership step is to encourage that in our male colleagues.
And when we have a system that supports what's being, God's got a wicked sense of humour and has given us a great task.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So you can only do it that one chunk at a time.
That's right. And we do have a long time. It's not got to happen right now.
No.